Thank you, Karen, so much. I appreciate that introduction. Hi, everybody. Like Karen said, I'm Kati Zarati, and I'll be presenting to you today on improving paraprofessional and teacher collaboration for better student outcomes. I'm excited to be here with you for the next hour and a half. A few points of business. I think you need to know a little bit about who I am as a human being so that you understand where I'm coming from with this content. My name is Kati in Spanish or Carrie in English. My friends call me Kati, but you can think of me however you'd like in your head. I am originally from Skokie, Illinois. Shout out to anybody from the North Chicago suburbs if you're in the room. And I lived in Chicago for the last 15 or so years. I'm a public school kid. I'm the kind of person that loved school growing up, and obviously I still love school now because I'm teaching at a university. Um, After high school, I went to college at Carroll College in Wisconsin to become a nurse. But it turns out I'm very bad at biology, and nursing was not for me. I really wanted to work with kids, and particularly with kids that had complex medical needs. But the biology piece of it wasn't great. And C's get degrees, everybody. But while I was in school, I was definitely working through school. I was a bartender and a waitress and doing all sorts of odd jobs. I started working with adults that needed medical help and care in their homes. And then one day, a young man in one of my classes says, "Hey, have you ever heard of autism?" And I said, "No, I don't know what autism is." And this was in the early 2000s, so it wasn't as popular as it is now. And I said to him, "Well, how much does it pay?" And he said, $15 an hour. All right, ILL. Um, um, and I said, "Yeah, sign me up. That sounds great." And he said, "Well, I think you'd be good at working with kids with autism." So I started doing one-on-one work with kids with autism in homes and in communities. So if families wanted us to work on skills that were required to go to church, that's what we did. If families wanted us to work on skills for dinner time, that's what we did. And I really fell in love with working with families and kids in the home environment. But I needed something a little bit more sustainable after college, and so I decided to become a paraprofessional. And I worked as a paraprofessional in the Milwaukee area and then again in the Chicago area. And I worked in different settings. I was an inclusive paraprofessional, I worked in therapeutic schools. Um, um, so, sorry, I'm laughing at the chat. As I was working in schools, I started getting very frustrated with what it was like to be a paraprofessional without a lot of training. Sometimes I knew a lot more behavior management strategies because of the previous work that I had done. And I was a little bit frustrated that the schools sort of just threw us in there. A lot of times when I was in the general education environment, I didn't know if I was the one that was going to manage the behavior, or if the gen ed teacher was going to manage the behavior, or if the special ed teacher wanted me to use some kind of system. And so I decided, hey, let me go back and get my teaching degree. So I did that at the University of Illinois, Chicago. And I became a Chicago public schools teacher for kindergartners through third grade for most of it. I straddled, third and fourth grade for a little bit of time, but most of my time I was working with kids with extensive support needs in kindergarten one and two. I started to see issues there with paraprofessionals. My room was the room that paras came to hang out with. They did a little bit of complaining sometimes, and I definitely saw some bigger issues there. So I thought, well, I might be able to change this. So I decided to go get my PhD, still at the University of Illinois Chicago, and I decided to research paraprofessional training and figure out how we can change systems, micro and macro, for paraprofessionals. And so that's sort of how I'm here today. But that was a lot about me. You didn't ask, but I do like long walks on the beach. And I hope, well, I was going to say that I'm a gin drinker, but then I thought better of it because this is being recorded. But what the heck? We're all adults in the room. So a little bit about me. Now let's find out a little bit about you. So if you wouldn't mind in the chat, tell me about who you are. And you can be more than one number, maybe separate them by a comma. So if you're a parent or a teaching assistant, put a one down. If you're an early childhood professional or teacher, put a two down. An administrator, a three. If you're a parent, four. If you're a service provider, five. And if I didn't list your role, I apologize, but go ahead and just tell us. Great. So we've got a lot of early childhood folks. We've got a two, three, four from Carrie. Thanks. Multiple hats you wear. A one, two. Michelle goes by Mickey. Great to meet you, Michelle. A two and a four. Awesome. Well, I'm so glad you guys have decided to spend a little bit of your afternoon with me. Um, Thank you. Thank you. And it looks like we're across the state too. I saw some people telling us where they're from. You're more than welcome to put that in the chat if you want to get your fingers working and type that out. A little bit of logistics. If you want to access any of the materials and resources that I'm providing for you today, they are in this Google folder that will live forever. You can scan the QR code, but there is the link there. All right, we got Chicago, Northwest Side Chicago in the chat. Thank you. Good to see you. So I will be referencing a bunch of resources. The PowerPoint slide's going to be in this folder for you too. And so anytime you might need anything, please feel free to download it from this folder and use it. Awesome. Oh, Ottawa, Elgin. Great. Thank you all for being here. Okay, I'm going to put the link in the chat just one more time. Berkeley, Rock Island. Yeah, I love doing this because Illinois is just such a neat place. So here's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to discuss the collaboration challenges that teachers and staff face. I think the adult part of working in schools can be some of the most challenging stuff, especially in pre-service when we're teaching everybody how to be a great teacher. We focus a lot on the kids, but sometimes we don't focus enough on the adult portion of it. And there's a lot of skills that goes into being a team member and working with adults and managing adults. I'm going to talk a little bit about why this work is being done, but mostly we're going to spend our time trying to give you some strategies and some resources for improving collaboration. And if time allows and I talk at a decent pace, we might be able to practice a strategy or two. So again, I believe that this work is really important, talking about collaboration between staff members, because if teachers are happy, then students are happier too, right? When we take care of the adults, the culture of a school, the culture of any kind of learning environment improves. And then our kids notice that, right? It's exciting to be around somebody who is in a good mood, who is energized. And if we are constantly involved in conversations and challenging collaborations that sort of suck the life out of us, our kids are going to feel that. That kind of stuff is hard to put aside. So, a few norms on what we're going to do today. Like Karen said, there's going to be one time when we're going to get into a breakout room. Anytime I do a webinar, people are like, "Oh, I wish you had more breakout rooms." But then you also have people that are like, "I absolutely hate the breakout rooms," right? And so I guarantee here that there are some of you that are like, "Yes, I love a breakout room," and some of you that are like, "Not for me." And that's okay. We're only going to do one of them. So while you're in that breakout room, please balance the sharing and the listening. I think this is a good life motto too. We want to provide space for everybody who wants to share. When you're with introverts, not that any of you are, but sometimes introverts in general find it really hard to speak their opinion when there are so many people that are just so willing to get in there. So sometimes a little bit of silence provides an opportunity for somebody who might otherwise not share. So we're going to balance the sharing and listening. I also like to say that when I'm in community with people, that when we tell stories, we want to leave the story, but take the lesson. We never want any kind of gossip to come out of this. And sometimes when we're talking about challenging situations, particularly with collaboration, it can be enticing to give a little more extra detail than we need to. So it's important that we take the lesson from any story that somebody tells us, but we anonymize anything that gets said. And then Zoom can be a tough environment to learn in. So this is a lot more fun when you all engage with me, when you're active in the chat. I already think you're going to do great at this just from the first few minutes that we've been on. So thank you for that. Those of you that have your um, video on, the nodding that you've been doing and the laughing at my jokes already, A plus to you. That's super helpful. So keep that up. That keeps my energy up too. So thanks so much. And if you are brave enough and you want to unmute at any point to add your 2 cents in, totally okay. All right. And questions. I welcome questions throughout. I'll do my best to keep an eye on the chat as we go through. Okay. So something for you to think about really quickly before we jump into this is what is hard about a conversation in which your point of view conflicts with your conversation partner. I'm not going to have anybody share in this moment, but I want you to think about it. We live in a climate right now that can be challenging for lots of reasons. And conversations sometimes can be really challenging. What makes it hard to have those really tough conversations? And then what do you say to yourself when you know you're going into a conversation and that person doesn't agree with you? Are you somebody that's going to ramp yourself up? Are you somebody who is ruminating on every detail of how you think it's going to go? So I'm going to give you just 10 seconds and I'm going to try to be quiet to just think about that. Okay. Is anybody out there in Zoom land brave enough to unmute and say, what is hard about going into this conversation when you know it conflicts with the person you're having a conversation with?
I think the most difficult thing is to start the conversation.
Thank you, Georgina. So, just even bringing up the conversation topic for you is something that you think is really hard?
Yes.
Okay. Um, what do you then say to yourself to do that? Do you have a little mantra that you say?
Yeah, I pretty much just say, to myself that, you can do hard things. Um, Confronting the issue will make it better in the long run.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Um, I appreciate you unmuting too. Okay, so we've got somebody in the chat saying not wanting to step on another person's toes or to make things awkward. Yeah, totally, right? You know that there's already some kind of tension in there, and perhaps by voicing what you have to say, you might either make something awkward or stand in their territory, perhaps something like that. That's great. Does anybody else have an idea around this? Okay. So we're going to talk a lot today about conversation, and I think it's the foundation for so much of the collaboration that we do. So think to yourself the last time you were in a bad conversation. I very squarely remember the last time I was in a bad conversation that turned to argument. Um, and usually what happens when you're in a bad conversation, it can be one-sided, right? You may not get a word in. Perhaps you were in a conversation when somebody was distracted. I think this one's really hard, particularly when you're emoting and somebody else is doing something, right? So if they're distracted, if they're looking at their phone and you're trying to tell them and be vulnerable, that can feel like a really bad conversation. But the one that most of us, I think of when we think of a bad conversation is that the tone and the delivery of the message that that person is sending makes whatever they're trying to say really hard to process. So if somebody is got an aggravated tone, if they're high pitched, if they're really aggressive, if they're quickly pacing their words, that can make it really hard for us to take what they're actually saying, perhaps the meaning behind it, and process that. Usually, when we're in a bad conversation, it feels in a few kinds of ways. It can feel really frustrating. We can feel disrespected. It can be really hurtful to us. And the last one is it can feel humiliating. And I think that one really gets to me because nobody wants to be humiliated, right? So when we're in bad conversations, these things happen and then they make us feel in a certain kind of way. And then we don't want to continue that conversation or we avoid that conversation partner. Now, bad news here is a lot of us, when I say they, why are they? But I'm going to say we, so bad of it. A lot of us are bad at being in conversations with folks because we're unaware of how we're behaving in those conversations, or we're acting from a set of beliefs that can lead to dehumanizing ways. And so, what I mean by that is so many times when we're in conversation with folks, we're not reflecting on our own personal behavior in the conversation. Usually, we're pretty preoccupied with something else or the way the other person is behaving in the conversation. We're not staying in our own lane, okay? So, today, I want to talk about why these conversations are so important. Well, we know conversations matter in schools because you cannot collaborate with folks if you do not know how to have a conversation with them. We also know that when collaboration is better in schools, that learning improves for kids. Student achievement in math and reading goes up. And the one I really deeply care about is that the quality of education also tends to improve for our students with disabilities. Why? Because teachers are able to talk to each other, paras and teachers are able to talk to each other, and then there is a seamless follow through, not seamless always, but usually a more seamless follow through with the plans that are going to be happening. If everybody's on the same page about how to do a behavior intervention, man, that's going to be better for that kid. But if you and I disagree and we can't figure out how to get over that disagreement, we're going to send mixed messages to our children. Okay. We also know that workplace satisfaction tends to improve. And boy, our jobs are already hard. So if we can make our workplaces better, let's go for it. So we know that teacher turnover and teacher stress go down when you have a more collaborative environment. And we know that there is an increased respect and understanding for paraprofessionals. One of the biggest reasons paraprofessionals leave the field is because they feel devalued and disrespected. And one of the biggest ways to get them more valued is to solicit their opinions. So often, paraprofessionals feel overlooked during IEP team meetings, during parent teacher conferences. When we could just solicit a little bit of their opinion, that makes a person feel so much more valued. But to do that, you got to be willing to engage in having a conversation. And then lastly, everybody wants to have shorter meetings, and better conversations mean more efficient conversations, which then means having shorter meetings. Now, I don't think that conversations only matter in our work because they matter in our life too. I think most of us are not going to be thinking about the last IEP we wanted to write, or if that lesson plan could have just been a little bit better when we're in our last moments, right? Most of us are going to be thinking about the cherished relationships that we have. And to have really good relationships, you need to be able to have great conversations with people. We also know that interruption has become the absolute norm. And so it makes it really hard to have deep and meaningful conversations when we're constantly interrupted. Most of us have wearable technology and people can get a hold of us constantly. I'm sure you've experienced being in a conversation with somebody, they're telling you something, they look down at their watch and you're like, yep, that person's disconnected from me. We all do it and it's really hurtful, but we continue to do it to other people, right? We also know that loneliness can happen even when we're surrounded by people. If you're not willing to engage in conversation, you're going to feel lonely. And then conversations increase the value of trust we have with other folks. Okay. So, um, a lot of times, collaboration in classrooms in early childhood centers can really struggle because there can be an experience versus education mismatch. So you may have a brand new teacher coming out, great degree, coming out from Illinois. We prepare great teachers, right? They're still only 21. They're still only 22. This might be the first time they're ever managing a classroom. And you might have a paraprofessional who's been in that setting for 15 years and has great strategies and ideas. But immediately, those folks might feel disconnected from each other because of a power imbalance, right? And so that can happen. You also could have an age versus age mismatch, just generational kinds of things. Some of us more seasoned folks may not understand whatever some of our more younger folks are going through. This can happen between paras and paras. This can happen between teachers and teachers. Um, you might have a mismatch because you have different kinds of styles and personalities. What I like to say about this is that you can't dislike somebody on company time. You can dislike them later on, just like you can't dislike a kid during working hours. You can't dislike your colleague on company time. We got to figure out how to work together for better student outcomes. One of the biggest things I see with collaboration falling apart is that somebody is fearful that they're not going to do a good job. I see this a lot when we're pushing students with extensive support needs into inclusive environments. Sometimes what you'll see is a gen ed teacher, and I'm not trying to dog on gen ed teachers by any means. But sometimes you'll see a gen ed teacher who is a little bit standoffish towards our students with extensive support needs or disabilities. And I think it comes from a place of fear. I really want to give this kid an education, but I don't know how. And I'm really worried that I'm going to mess it up. And so they may misunderstand what the expectations are, and they're unwilling to talk about it. And then finally, the last one is some role ambiguity. A lot of times people don't know what's their role, what's their lane, and what am I supposed to do in this exact same, in this context. And we can do a lot of prevention for role ambiguity, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Okay. Um, okay. So we talk about collaboration a lot, but I don't think that often we define it enough. So I'm going to use the definition that I like to use so that when I say the word collaboration, you know what I mean. And so for me, this comes from Friend. She's a collaboration researcher. Um, Collaboration is an interpersonal style for the direct interaction between at least two co-equal parties voluntarily engaged in shared decision making as they work toward a common goal. So I bring this up because it is a style. You have to be willing to collaborate to be a collaborator. You cannot force people to collaborate if they do not want to collaborate. When I solve that problem, I'll let you know, and that will be my $1 million idea. I would like to know how do we get people who are unwilling to collaborate with each other to be more willing, but so far I haven't figured it out. But truly, if people are not willing to collaborate, it's not going to happen. So it's a style that you adopt. Okay. Um, it needs to be between people that feel like they are co-equal. This can be really hard in schools, again, because of those power dynamics. Paras and teachers often do not feel like they are on the same plane. But when we are in a conversation, there are things that we can do so that it feels more equal. Okay. Like having shared decision making. So we're making decisions together on certain things and we're working towards a common goal. So often in classrooms, teachers make the goal for the classroom and they forget to include their teaching assistants. They say, okay, this is the vision that I have for my classroom. It's going to be so calm. It's going to be so quiet. It's going to be so organized. And that may not be the vision for the other people in your classroom. You might have a TA that's like, no, I want this to be energetic and fun and it's going to be a party, right? And so when those things are disconnected, you're not going to have great collaboration. So there are a few elements to really effective partnerships. I had already talked about how it needs to be voluntary. So everyone has to agree that they're going to be collaborative. Each person's opinion needs to be valued. You're going to have those mutual goals. You're going to share the responsibilities. You're going to share resources. And you're going to share accountability for outcomes. I want to spend a little time here. What I mean by sharing accountability for outcomes is that when things go great in your settings, in your classrooms, in your centers, everybody gets to celebrate. At the same time, if you have a child who is constantly struggling with their behavior or something, they're not making the gains that you want them to make. That is not on one person. That is on the team. If a particular child continues to struggle with one TA, then that to me says there's something in the environment here that is not just on that person, right? So we share accountability for the good and the not so good. Okay. And then everybody values the style, and then everybody needs to trust one another. This one can also be hard because there are two camps of people. There are people that believe trust is earned, or there are people that believe you have my trust until you break it. And if you're working with a group of people and those things are different, that can also be a problem. Okay. So I gave you a lot of background. So what do we do about all of this? Well, I think that we improve the way we communicate. Then we think about what is and isn't conflict. Sometimes we have a misunderstanding about what true conflict is. Then we understand how to give and receive feedback from each other. And finally, we try to create spaces that improve belonging for all of the adults. And when all of the adults feel like they belong, we're more likely to get belonging for all of the kids, right? So there's four things. We improve the way we communicate. We think about what is and isn't conflict. We talk about how do we give and receive feedback to one each other, and we try to make our places of belonging. So all of this comes down to collaboration means communication. And to communicate, you need to know how to have a conversation. So to become better at communication, we first have to understand ourselves as conversationalists. So you've got a sender and receiver when you're having a conversation. A lot of times the conversation can be one way, particularly in a classroom. This is what we're going to do today. Boom, let's go do it. That's not a conversation, everybody. Okay. We want our conversations to go two ways, that we are soliciting information from each other and the meaning is being created during that moment. To do that, we need to know what we believe, and then we need to act within those beliefs. So that to me is living authentically. Let me try to say it a different way. We have to know what we believe, and then we have to act in a way that is consistent with those beliefs. For example, if I believe that listening is important to being a great conversationalist, but I'm constantly interrupting or holding on to my own thought, I am not acting consistently with my belief. Some of us are chronic interrupters. I know that I have had that problem before, but I also believe that listening is critically important. So, what do I do if I believe that listening is important, but I know that I'm a chronic interrupter? And the reason I'm a chronic interrupter is because I'm holding on to my own thought so that I could get it out. Well, at some point, I need to change my own action. I need to say, my thought may not be that valuable, and I'm going to let whatever happens in this conversation happen. And if it's really important, that thought will come back. That's okay. Or I'm really going to do some changing in that I'm going to start paraphrasing what that person said to me because that will help me with that listening piece. So, what do I need to change in my conversation style so that my beliefs and my actions actually line up? So, here's a second one. I don't judge my conversation partner. Well, an inconsistent behavior would be going into the teacher's lounge and saying, "Can you believe she would think like that? That she would do that?" Right? So if I believe it's important to not judge others, but then I go around and say, "Wow, that was a crazy idea that she had. I can't believe she thought that." That is an inconsistent belief and action. Thank you, Connie. I appreciate that. Thank you for the engagement back and forth. Okay. So there are 6 beliefs that I subscribe to when we're having good conversations. You'll see it down at the bottom of the screen. This book is called Better Conversation. It comes from Jim Knight. He's a great researcher. He has studied conversations in educational environments for a really long time, and he's compiled this book. This is going to be a very big Cliff Notes version of that. So he believes that teachers and educators, to have great conversations in schools, they need to follow these 6 beliefs and then act in them. You see each other as equal partners in the conversation. That doesn't mean equal partners at work. That means when we are talking and having a dialogue, your opinion and my opinion, they're on the same plane. He believes that people should have a lot of autonomy, meaning that if somebody's not willing to engage in that conversation in that very moment, we have to respect that, right? We have to say, hey, is now a good time or is now not a good time? And we have to respect somebody's autonomy to make that decision to be engaged in the conversation. We also have to believe that we actually want to hear what others have to say, even when they disagree with us. We have to not judge our conversation partners because some of the best ideas come from a little bit of a wackadoo place sometimes. We might need to change it and shift it and mold it a little bit, but we don't want to judge the ideas of others. We also believe in this giving of back and forth, that a conversation should be organic. And then this last one is a little hokey, but I like it. Conversations should be life-giving. And so what we mean by that is, have you ever met a person that every single time you engage with them, they have drained the life out of you? Right? You're like, oh my gosh, I have to go work with this person again. That's the opposite of what we mean here. Even though conversations can sometimes be hard, the best conversations can sometimes come out of a place of disagreement because it can feel really productive to get through a challenging conversation. And those don't necessarily suck the life out of you. Sometimes those conversations can be life-giving because you're like, wow, we faced this problem, we got through it, and now we're going to be stronger collaborators because of it. Okay. So these are the 6 beliefs that I really believe help us. Okay. Now, the first resource I want to share with you from the drive that I shared earlier, I think there are a couple people that came in late, so I'm just gonna, I've sent that as a direct message, sorry. Um, Here's the link for that. this first resource, if you have a big team, if you're an administrator or you're a teacher and you're working in a team of several folks, you might want to do something called a communication inventory. You might want to just check to see what areas are you all currently struggling with. Have everybody do it anonymously. Don't put their names on it. And it asks questions about how is the communication? Is it open? Is there trust in these relationships? Do people feel mutually respected? Is there a common understanding happening? Do we share responsibilities? Are folks actively participating? Is there shared decision making? And are we implementing things the way we say we're going to? This can be really nice as the beginning of the year happens so that you can see where some of the struggles are. If I'm an administrator, I really like giving this to some of my teams so that I can say, okay, where do they need support? And how can I help build that support? So, this is one resource that can sort of help you evaluate what's happening at that communication level with folks. The second couple of points that I want to make about conversations come from another book called Super Communicators by Charles Duhigg. I really like this book. It complements the Better Conversations book. He talks about conversations in these sort of three buckets that we all engage in three different conversations. The first conversation is called the "What's this really about?" conversation. That's the conversation that was a much more logistical conversation. We're talking and we're trying to make decisions. The second conversation that people can engage in is the "How do we feel?" conversation. This is more of an emotional conversation between folks. And the third conversation is this "who are we?" conversation. This more of an identity conversation that gets really deep into the who we are as human beings. He brings this up because oftentimes when you're working with folks, you may be having the same conversation, but you both are coming from it from different places. So uh so I like to think about this as teachers are making 1 million decisions every day. Okay. You all are responsible for making 1 million decisions. And a lot of times, teachers, we're operating from this very logistical mindset. I have this to plan. I've got this note to send out. I've got this data to take, all of this, right? And so we're in this decision-making mindset. And sometimes when we're working with paraprofessionals or TAs and they're coming to us to have a conversation, they're coming out to us to have this more emotional conversation. Jonathan attacked the heck out of me today. I got bit. I am really hurting. I want to talk and process about this. And the teacher might be like, well, this is what we're going to do for the behavior plan. And the para is like, yeah, but I don't think you're hearing me. I'm feeling a little burnt out. And then the teacher's like, well, we're just going to use tokens. And this person is like, yeah, but I need to go home and really rest, right? And so we're not matching in the conversation. So if we're not matching, we're going to feel disconnected. It takes one person to recognize, oh, they're having an emotional conversation. I'm having a logistical conversation. And if this needs to go somewhere, we need to get on the same page. I do put this on the teachers a little bit. Teachers, I think it is in your place to pause and say, oh, I think you're needing me to be in a more emotional mindset. Right now, I'm thinking much more logistically about what are we going to do so that this behavior doesn't happen again. And so, really thinking about when we walk away from a conversation that felt disconnected, it's likely because we weren't matching each other in the kind of conversation that we were having. You can think about this in a little bit more kid-friendly way. Does this conversation need to be about, do you need to be helped, hugged, or heard? The helped conversation is about making decisions. So, what is this about? The hugged conversation is about listening and empathizing. Do you need me to hear what you're saying and empathize with you? Or do you need to be heard on a deeper level? And are you really thinking about, well, what does this mean for our school systems, right? Those kinds of things. So, helped, hugged, or heard can be another way to be thinking about how do we have those conversations. If it's still not making any sense, here's the last thing I'll say about this. You can think about this as this going to be a practical discussion? Do I need to lean into data and reasoning? Or is this going to be an empathetic discussion? Do I need to lean into stories and more compassion? And when we're thinking about the stories and more compassion, something that I've been saying that comes out of this book is, am I perspective taking or am I perspective getting? when we empathize, we've sort of been taught to say, oh, I know how that feels. That must feel really frustrating. And that's perspective taking. I'm trying to take your perspective. Instead, what we need to start doing is do more perspective getting. Well, what is this person's perspective? And ask questions about it. I can understand that that's really frustrating, but how do you feel about it? What is this making you feel like? I have found that just changing this little bit when I want to be empathetic gives me so much more clarity when I'm talking to people because I think, oh, maybe they're really frustrated by that. But actually, what they come back to say is, I'm not frustrated by it. I'm disappointed. And I'm like, oh, I never would have thought you would have been disappointed by that because I wasn't asking questions. I was just trying to empathize and put myself in your shoes. I can't do that. I got to get your perspective instead of try taking it. Right. And so I think the knowing this distinction when we're working with our team of paras can be really, really helpful because a lot of times we're trying to take their perspective instead of get their perspective. So we're going to try putting a little bit into practice. This is the one and only time I'm going to put you in Zoom rooms. Um, but I like this activity because I think this activity really translates to shared decision making and working towards a common goal. And so when I go into schools, one of the first things I do in the beginning of the school year PD is I ask folks to create a vision for their classroom. And so when you go into your Zoom rooms, what I'd like you to do is write down three feeling words for how you would like your school environment to feel, your classroom. This could be aspirational and inspirational. So you'll want to consider all the staff that comes in and out, and your families and everybody who works there. So how would you want your classroom to feel? Then, when you go in your Zoom room, you're going to share those words with each other. You're going to say, I really want my classroom to feel X, Y, and Z. But then, as a Zoom room, I want you to take and decide on only three for your whole Zoom room. The idea here is that you are trying to take multiple perspectives and have a conversation about people's values and try to figure out how can you make an environment inclusive of all the people's different ideas. All right? So, you're going to go into that Zoom room for I'd say 4 minutes. We'll do 4 minutes at the Zoom room. If you hate the Zoom activity, you'll just come back and join us in this main room in 4 minutes, but please try to engage. So, three personal words, then you're going to do a share out, and then try to decide on three words for the whole classroom. And we're practicing shared decision making and we're practicing some of these conversation skills right now. Thanks all. So, Karen's going to help us with that. Excellent. Thank you all for coming back. You survived the one and only Zoom breakout activity. I appreciate you all going in there. I know 4 minutes was likely not enough time. This is just to give you a taste of what you could do with this activity. So, um, the idea for this is a classroom vision statement gives folks a better understanding of what each person values, right? So if you value organization, but I value a fun time, that can be different. Oh, there we go. Um, if begins the dialogue for shared decision making, it provides a reminder for accountability. I really like this one because if you make a little poster in your classroom that all the adults have agreed to, and when the week in November comes before Thanksgiving and everything starts to get a little squirrely, and you look at it and you're like, wow, it does not feel calm in here. And we all agreed that we wanted to make it feel calm. You can all reassess and be like, okay, what part do I have in trying to help our classroom get back to calm, right? Um, it can be, and also just a really nice starting point for when conversation occurs or when conflict occurs. Again, if to not feeling calm, we can say, hey, we really wanted it to feel calm in here. And I don't know about you, but it's not feeling calm. Can we have a conversation about that? So it provides it like the paper is telling us this is the thing that we said we wanted to do, not you or me is telling us. A lot of times when we put too much emphasis on the human beings, we start to get a little defensive. But if we have a little poster that we've all agreed to, it can be a little easier to be like, hey, do you remember when we made that vision and we said that we wanted it to feel this way? We said we were all going to respect each other, and respecting each other looks like being on time. Yeah, let's talk about it because I know that lately it's been hard for you to get to work on time. So that can happen. Hopefully, in your Zoom rooms, you had an opportunity to engage in some of those conversation skills, asking questions, those kinds of things. Um, okay. So now let's talk about my favorite thing, which is, are we having a conflict or are we just disagreeing? Because they're different. Conflict is a different level of disagreement. And a lot of times when we're in schools, a lot of us are like, oh, I'm so conflict avoidant. Well, actually, I think you're worse than that. I think you're disagreement avoidant. You don't like just disagreeing with somebody else. Disagreement's not bad. And conflict doesn't always have to be bad either. It can be super productive. And so let's talk about why conflict happens and what it actually is. So, a lot of us, we are going to have our bad days because we're all somebody plus. We are all a teacher plus maybe a parent, a caregiver, a sibling, a partner, a member of a softball team, right? We're all somebody plus and we have lives outside of here. And those lives outside of here impact our lives inside our classrooms. I don't personally believe that you can leave your baggage at the door. Your baggage follows you. If you have a hard time with your family before you get to school, you're going to be in a rougher mood, right? And so if you can say, hey, I'm having a hard morning, I can't engage in this conversation right now. Can I just drink my coffee? I will be better in a few minutes. That is something, right? But sometimes you're walking in the door, you just had a hectic morning, you see your a para coming towards you and say, I've got a million things that I want to talk to you about. You're already ready to bite their head off, okay? We also know that our jobs are hard. These are really stressful jobs. Sometimes personalities clash. Sometimes we can feel disrespected, or we know that our roles are unclear. And so conflict can happen for any of these reasons. But what is conflict? Okay, there are three components to conflict. Conflict includes disagreement. So that could be a difference in our values, our needs, our interests, or our opinions. It also includes an interference. So behaviors that block the attainment of our goals, our interests, or objectives. And the third thing it needs to do is it needs to include negative emotions. So that might be feelings of fear, anger, anxiety, jealousy, or frustration. Yeah, thanks, Jill. I'm just seeing your comment now that sometimes it's nice just to enter the classroom and have a seat and take a deep breath before starting your day. I am 100% with you on that. So conflict needs to have these three things for it to be truly conflict. And so uh, let's go through this little exercise to paint the picture a little bit better. Who in here, and you can just type in the word vanilla if this is your belief, who in here believes that vanilla is the superior ice cream than chocolate? If that is you, please type in the words vanilla. I see, I knew somebody was going to come out with the all caps and the exclamation point. You vanilla people really have strong feelings. Okay. Far too many of you believe that vanilla is the superior ice cream. We disagree. We disagree, but we are not in conflict. I believe that chocolate is the superior ice cream, and I'm right. And vanilla is not the superior ice cream. Okay. But we are just in disagreement at this moment. We're not in conflict yet. Now, let's say those 10 of you, 15 of you, far too many of you, were in charge of planning the ice cream social after this webinar. And you had the budget. And you only bought vanilla ice cream. Uh-oh. We're getting closer to conflict now because now you have blocked my goal. You have blocked me from my enjoyment. But let's say today I'm okay with that because I know that when I get home, I have a molten chocolate cake from Aldi in the fridge that I'm gonna have. If you haven't tried those, they're very good. Okay. I'm okay with it. So I actually don't have negative feelings toward that. Okay, you all have your vanilla. We are not in conflict. We disagreed. You might have blocked me, but I don't care. My feelings don't align with my definition of conflict. But if I didn't have that Aldi molten chocolate cake, we would be in conflict, right? Because now I'm very angry or I'm upset with you. Let's take a little more of a professional example. You have uh, a teacher and a para working in the classroom, and you have agreed that to start the day, everyone's going to get there at 7:50. The day starts at 8, but everyone's just sort of made this informal agreement that we're going to get here 10 minutes early to start our day. Um, Usually one of you runs late. Well, that's okay. No problem. We're not in conflict. We disagree. We think you should be here on time, but one of you is running late, so I don't really care. But on this particular Thursday, I have an IEP meeting to go to. And so you're late today, and usually it doesn't bother me. But now I'm late to my meeting. And now you've blocked me from one of my personal values, which is being on time. And now I am angry towards you. And on this day, we are in conflict. So it can be the same issue day to day, but depending on how I react to it and depending on whether or not it's blocking me from what I need to do, may or may not be the conflict, right? So sometimes we're just in disagreement, and sometimes we're a step further and we are in conflict, okay? One of the biggest ways to avoid conflict is to have paras and teachers talk about the roles and responsibilities that everybody has. Thank you, Fanny. That Aldi's chocolate cake is really good. Um, Roles and responsibilities and knowing who's in what lane is critical for trying to avoid some conflict. For example, as a paraprofessional, something that I was supposed to do was help manage the behavior of one of the kids. But if you have a chart system, a clip system, a point system, is it my job to manage the individual behavior of this child, or are you going to address the behavior of this child? If I manage their behavior, then I'm sort of taking your authority as the classroom teacher away. But you might be thinking, well, you're sitting right next to them, manage their behavior. And already we're not on the same page about whose role is what. So, in the folder that I provided to you all are two roles and responsibilities guides. One is a one pager that is a little more simple, and there's another one, there's a version two that is a little bit more in depth. And it asks you to think through whose role and responsibility is it? The special ed teacher, the paraprofessional, the gen ed teacher? Is it the occupational therapist? And you can use that guide to have conversations about, well, sometimes I will need you to lead a whole class lesson. Oh, I don't know if I should do that. I'm uncomfortable with that. I understand that you're uncomfortable. What can I do to make you more comfortable to lead the whole class lesson? Because I need to do this assessment with this child, and everybody else needs to sort of be taken care of, but you can't do the assessment. So sometimes, on the rare occasion, I do need you to lead the whole class lesson. So what are we going to do about it, right? So having conversations about the lanes that people are in is critically important. This document's not meant to be static. You can change it, manipulate it, but it's just a really nice way to talk about what are the roles and responsibilities that we're doing day to day and who should be doing them. Okay. A little bit more on conflict is I really like this quote. Speak when you are angry, and you'll make the best speech you will ever regret, right? So, it's knowing about yourself and knowing what you need as a human being when you inevitably get into conflict. Working with adults is complex. Again, our jobs are really stressful. So, I like to think about us planning for conflict. We should be planning for conflict as adults before the conflict happens so that we can say, oh, when I'm cool, calm, and collected, here's what I think I prefer. I'm a person that needs a 24-hour cool off period. Well, I'm a person who will ruminate in that 24 hours. If we don't talk about it right away, I won't stop thinking about it. So, where is the compromise there? In the resource folder, there is this collaboration and teaming agreement. It asks you to sit down with your team and say, what is the communication plan? What happens if you're late? Are you texting the whole team? Are you going to text just the teacher? Who's going to lead the team meetings? Are we going to have agendas or do we prefer to have a more laid back approach? What's the expectation for responding to communication from a team member? If you're texting me past 8 p.m., I'm watching my TikToks and I'm not responding to anything related to school, right? So you better believe that I will not. I'm awake. I'm not responding. I will respond to you at 6 a.m. when I'm getting ready for my workout. And you might not like that because you might like you to sleep until 7:35. I don't know. So we have to think through a lot of those things. There's other questions like, what happens when the morale is down? What do you think we should be doing when we know that the morale is down? Are there things that we can do as a team that we agree to? Do we want to go bowling? Do we want to go to the local bar? Do we want to have a movie night? Do we want me to bring in coffee and donuts? What are things? This is one of my favorite ones. What are your communication disconnectors? What are things that are irritants to you as a communication partner? For example, if I'm asking you to do something in my classroom and I say, hey, do you mind taking these letters and putting them in all the kids' backpacks? And I send that to you in a text, and you respond with the word sure without an exclamation point, I'm immediately annoyed with your response. Because that to me says I have uh, asked you of a request that you're not that eager to do. Sure. But if you say sure with an exclamation point, man, that's so much better for me. So just the word sure, if you constantly respond to me with sure, and that's an irritant to me, I'm going to struggle with our text communication. So if I can get those out and tell you ahead of time so that we can avoid each other's irritants, man, that'll make the days a lot better. Okay. So that's one more resource for you all. Any questions so far? I know I've been going for 56 minutes. All right. We're going to move then into, if you have questions, please ask them. We're going to move into the last section of today's presentation, where we're thinking about how do we give and receive feedback from our teams. Okay. Is giving feedback hard? You don't have to answer this if you don't want. But okay, Michelle, thank you, Mickey. Yeah, right away, Michelle said, yes, giving feedback is hard. If you don't mind, Michelle, you can either unmute or type into the chat. What about it is hard for you?
So this is my first year as a director as well as a teacher. So I have been working side by side with all these other teachers in our preschool program for many years now. But it was difficult because I felt almost like I'm intentionally critiquing them, even though that's not per se exactly what I was doing. Like I was observing the whole classroom as a whole, but yet when I was doing my write ups, I had to explain things where I thought could have flowed a little better or been done a little different. And the way, again, it kind of goes back to our conversation before that you were talking about. Like, I don't want to be super offensive either, because it's not that they're doing a horrible job or being terrible, but I also have to give that feedback because there are some things that all can be changed. But that's
Yeah.
kind of what I meant by that.
Thank you. No, I really appreciate you sharing that. And I think you're getting to this point. My pre-K folks, I love you guys because you guys have the best collection of teacher gear. I pre-K teachers, kinder teacher, like all of these cool teacher shirts. I bring this up because being an educator in pre-K and at any level is part of our identities. We resonate with this concept that we are these educators, we're molding and changing lives, and it becomes so intertwined with how we see ourselves. And I think that's amazing, right? I don't think you can do this job if you don't put in part of you as the human. But when we give feedback to each other, I think part of what we're worried about is saying something that hurts somebody to the core of their identity, right? You know that you take this job so personally, you love it. And when you're saying, I think you could do this better, you're almost saying to them, oh, a little part of you is wrong. And people take that so personally, and we don't mean it that way. Right. Denetra, you saying that we have to be in the right mindset, right? It's really hard to give feedback because when we're giving feedback, it's so much more about I'm not trying to take this defensively, right? And that can be really hard when it is so personal to us as human beings. So there is a way to give feedback that doesn't solicit a defensive response to people, but it's hard to do. So we're going to look at how do we give feedback so that the person that is accepting the feedback is in a place that they can hear it, because the way I'm delivering it isn't critiquing their identity, isn't critiquing them as a human being. It's just pointing out this leads to this. So how can we make it better? And then inviting them into a conversation that isn't critical. Um, yeah, so it's easier for me to encourage others to give constructive feedback, uh, because those receiving constructive feedback can sometimes escalate, become defensive, and start to critique us. Yes, I agree with that. And something I tell teachers a lot is that if we want to create an environment where we're able to give good feedback to our team members, we, in the beginning, are not giving any feedback. We are only receiving feedback. We are soliciting feedback from our team to have them build trust that we hear what they have to say. And this is hard, but again, because if they're not giving feedback in a constructive way, it can feel like it's getting to our identity. But in the beginning, it really takes a practice of pulling the feedback instead of pushing the feedback, only taking feedback in the beginning. And then we start creating a culture of giving feedback and saying, hey, when we're doing this lesson, I'm going to ask you to do this lesson. Before the lesson even happens, you say to that person, let's talk about that lesson and how it goes, so that it's neutral. It's not constructive. They don't know that it's going to be constructive. They just know that feedback's coming. And it could be a matter of that lesson went really great. Good job. Or, hey, let's talk about that lesson. Where do you think you struggled with that lesson? But you tell them ahead of time before the lesson even happens so that they know that the feedback is coming and so that they can't get defensive about it because it hasn't even happened yet. So we're going to watch a quick little video about how do we give brain-friendly feedback. It comes with this 4-part formula. And I'm hoping that the sound works. We tested it earlier. It's about a 4-minute video. This will give me a chance to drink a little bit of water too. So let's make sure that I clicked this here. Sound great. All right. You can hear it?
If you look at like a carpenter, they have a toolbox. A dentist, they have their drills. In our era and the type of work most of us are doing, the tool we most need is actually centered around being able to give and receive feedback well. Humans have been talking about feedback for centuries. In fact, Confucius, way back in 500 BC, talked about how important it is to be able to say difficult messages well. But to be honest, we're still pretty bad at it. In fact, a recent Gallup survey found that only 26% of employees strongly agree that the feedback they get actually improves their work. Those numbers are pretty dismal. So what's going on? The way that most people give their feedback actually isn't brain friendly. People fall into one of two camps. Either they're of the camp that is very indirect and soft, and the brain doesn't even recognize that feedback is being given, or it's just simply confused. Or they fall into the other camp of being too direct. And with that, it tips the other person into the land of being defensive. And there's this part of the brain called the amygdala, and it's scanning at all times to figure out whether the message has a social threat attached to it. With that, we'll move forward in defensiveness, or we'll move backwards in retreat. And what happens is the feedback giver then starts to dysregulate as well. They add more ums and ahs and justifications, and the whole thing gets wonky really fast. It doesn't have to be this way. I and my team have spent many years going into different companies and asking who here is a great feedback giver. Anybody who's named again and again, we actually bring into our labs to see what they're doing differently. What we find is that there's a 4-part formula that you can use to say any difficult message well. Okay, are you ready for it? Here we go. The first part of the formula is what we call the micro yes. Great feedback givers begin their feedback by asking a question that is short but important. It lets the brain know that feedback is actually coming. It would be something, for example, like, do you have 5 minutes to talk about how that last conversation went? Or I have some ideas for how we can improve things. Can I share them with you? This micro yes question does two things for you. First of all, it's going to be a pacing tool. It lets the other person know that feedback is about to be given. And the second thing it does is it creates a moment of buy-in. I can say yes or no to that yes or no question. And with that, I get a feeling of autonomy. The second part of the feedback formula is going to be giving your data point. Here you should name specifically what you saw or heard and cut out any words that aren't objective. There's a concept we call blur words. A blur word is something that can mean different things to different people. Blur words are things that are not specific. So for example, if I say, you shouldn't be so defensive, or you could be more proactive. What we see great feedback givers doing differently is they'll convert their blur words into actual data points. So for example, instead of saying, you know, you aren't reliable, we would say, you said you'd get that email to me by 11, and I still don't have it yet. Specificity is also important when it comes to positive feedback. And the reason for that is that we want to be able to specify exactly what we want the other person to increase or diminish. And if we stick with blur words, they actually won't have any clue particularly what to do going forward to keep repeating that behavior. The third part of the feedback formula is the impact statement. Here you name exactly how that data point impacted you. So for example, I might say, because I didn't get the message, I was blocked on my work and couldn't move forward. Or, I really liked how you added those stories because it helped me grasp the concepts faster. It gives you a sense of purpose and meaning and logic between the points, which is something the brain really craves. The fourth part of the feedback formula is a question. Great feedback givers wrap their feedback message with a question. They'll ask something like, well, how do you see it? Or, this is what I'm thinking we should do. But what are your thoughts on it? What it does is it creates commitment rather than just compliance. It makes the conversation no longer be a monologue, but rather becomes a joint problem-solving situation. But there's one last thing. Great feedback givers not only can say messages well, but also they ask for feedback regularly. In fact, our research on perceived leadership shows that you shouldn't wait for feedback to be given to you, what we call push feedback, but rather you should actively ask for feedback, what we call pulling feedback. Pulling feedback establishes you as a continual learner and puts the power in your hands. The most challenging situations are actually the ones that call for the most skillful feedback. But it doesn't have to be hard. Now that you know this 4-part formula, you can mix and match it to make it work for any difficult conversation.
All right. So I really like this 4-part formula. I think the critical part here is taking out the blur words, taking out those words that can mean different things to different people. So it also takes a lot of practice to do this well. So any of you that have spouses or teenagers at home, I encourage you tonight to give this a try. So for example, one of my pet peeves is coming home to a sink full of dishes. I like to cook a lot, but for me to get in a space to cook, I want a clean working area. If I come home and I just start yelling at everybody, "Ay, carajo, you left the dishes in the sink, and now I can't get started," la, 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 they're not going to hear me, right? But if I say, "Carlos, do you have a second to chat with me?" Carlos comes down. Carlos is my brother. I don't live with him anymore, but that's the first name that popped in mind, and I get frustrated with him. Carlos. um, I see that the dishes are in the sink, and I asked you to clean up the dishes this morning. Because the dishes are in the sink, I can't start dinner, and that means you're going to eat later. Do you think that tomorrow we can do something different about this? That starts a conversation, and now Carlos understands, okay, I didn't realize how this affected you and also impacts me. Now the dinner is going to be later, right? And so naming what happened as objectively as possible and then saying, and this is the impact of that behavior in the most objective way, helps us connect the dots for those folks that we're giving the feedback to, right? It's a show, don't tell. We're showing them the impact instead of just telling them the problem. So in a more school kind of environment, here's the way we could do that. First, we get the micro yes, right? So do you have a time to chat? Or my favorite, after this lesson or later today, can we talk? Are you willing to do a check-in with me? So we ask folks, are they willing? And then we get that buy-in. So they can say yes or no. Then we say the data point. I saw that you reprimanded Jonathan really firmly by saying, Jonathan, you didn't do your work when I asked you to. That reprimand seemed to affect Jonathan really significantly. Afterwards, he put his head down and he refused to work. Do you think there are other strategies that we could use that might have a better outcome for Jonathan? So we're trying to take this whole like, you did a bad reprimand, and we're saying, hey, this is what you said to the kid. This is what happened to the kid. Is there a thing that we could do better next time? And when we turn it into a question, they might be able to say to us, yeah, I was really frustrated. Next time, I think what I need to do is tap out. Next time, I think what I need to do is, give Jonathan another reminder, right? We give them the opportunity to reflect on their own responsibility in the action instead of any kind of blame. Usually, what I like to do is make the adults practice this, but I promise that we would only do one Zoom room today. But I like to get folks to practice this. So, thinking through this scenario, I'm going to read the scenario out. And then I'm just going to give you 30 seconds to think through how you would start this feedback session. So we have Miss Rivera. She's a special education teacher in a pre-K inclusive classroom. Um, the classroom is, she started to feel increasingly frustrated during student break times. While the students are technically on break, their behaviors are often escalating during this period. Some wander around unsafely, some become dysregulated, and a few require redirection to stay within the classroom boundaries. Miss Rivera's noticed a pattern too. As soon as the students go on break, the paraprofessional assigned to her classroom, Mr. Thompson, immediately pulls out his cell phone and becomes disengaged from the environment. He typically sits at the back of the room, scrolling or texting, unaware of the subtle shifts in the student's behavior. This leaves Miss Rivera to manage the entire group alone during a time when students still need active supervision and she needs to be setting up for the next lesson. Miss Rivera values Mr. Thompson because during instructional time, he's really patient. He's effective with students. But this lack of engagement during the break is creating a safety concern and adding to her stress. So she knows it's time to give feedback to Mr. Thompson. Perhaps this sounds like a few of your classrooms, or you've seen this kind of thing happen. Cell phones are a problem with kids, with adults. So, what would you do here? How would you start the conversation? What's the micro yes you would give? What's the data point? What's the impact statement? And how do you end on a question? Feel free to type it into the chat if you'd like to give it a little practice. I'm going to just take 30 seconds to let you think about it and see if you could put together a feedback statement. Okay, does anybody want to unmute and give it a try? That's okay. That's okay. All right, here's what I would say. I'd say, oh, yeah, go, Mickey, go.
I was just thinking that I would probably start with, hey, Mr. Thompson, I like to revamp a few things in the classroom to maybe find some other ways that we can get interactive and have some different kinds of opportunities and options for kids. Do you have a chance to sit down and talk for a second? And then I would continue with saying that some of my personal frustration is how chaotic certain times get in our classroom. So, how do you feel about doing several different options and have options prepared or ideas prepared to where we're still engaging with them during those breaks?
Awesome. Really good job, Mickey. Thank you so much. I'm going to provide a little feedback right now. So, the word chaotic could be really hard for someone to digest. So, what I would do is try to say something like, I really liked the way you opened it, but I might go and say, have you noticed the student's behaviors increasing during break time, right? Because we're not putting it on him. We're saying, hey, have you noticed this? I've noticed that we have more often than not during breaks, we have to run out of the classroom or something, or I need to say, Mr. Thompson, can you help me out here? And so I would explain, because you're right, it is chaotic, but that's one of those blur words. So I would explain what exactly you mean by chaos. Other than that, I think you did an awesome job there. So way to go. So right, practicing with this feedback formula it can feel a little clunky in the beginning. When you get good at it, when you get good at naming the data point and being super objective and then showing people what the impact is, you can change the way it flows. You can say, here's the impact, here's the data point. You can start with a question and end with a question. If you can keep in mind that we want to try to be super objective and show people this action leads to this consequence. Okay. Awesome, awesome job. All right, we're gonna wrap up with just a few more things. We already talked about push and pull feedback, so we're not gonna linger on that. Cultivating adult belonging is the last portion of this. So one of the biggest things that I notice for paras and teaching assistants in settings in which they're traveling between multiple environments is a lot of times our teaching assistants don't have literally a space for their stuff. When they're moving from classroom to classroom, they might not know where to put their cell phone. So their cell phone's going to be in their pocket. They may not know where to put their lunch. They may not know where to hang their jacket. If you create a space in your classroom for the adults, what ends up happening is you actually end up creating a time for connection and more collaboration. In my classroom, the paras came to my classroom for their coffee every morning, and I got to know them and their families and all of their stuff because I had a space for each of them, and they had a basket and a hook. And so if they know that they're going to hang their stuff up in your classroom every morning, they're also going to sit down and have their coffee in there. And that then creates a time to say, hey, can we actually talk about this? And then they have a place that literally they feel like they belong, right? So make a space for them. Literally, you can do some cheap things like cubbies. Cubbies are not cheap, but like milk crates and those kinds of things. Just something that helps with that it can go a really long way. I have a resource in the folder called the 5-minute meeting where I shouldn't have included this because this is too long of an explanation, but it's basically the idea that you meet with your team 5 minutes a day, and on day one, all you do is identify the challenges in the classroom. And you say, okay, everybody, on Monday morning, tell me what you're seeing is the issues in the classroom. On day two, and then you prioritize them. The teacher says, okay, I see that this is a priority and this is a priority. On day two, you say, we're going to take this priority and we're going to just drum up solutions. What do we think is the best way to tackle this one issue? Then you implement the solution and then you talk about it the next day and say, okay, well, how did it go? And you take one priority every week and you only work on that one thing and you slowly build capacity. What often happens in the beginning of the year is we all feel overwhelmed because there's 1 million priorities. But what we want to do is prioritize. Okay, well, we need to prioritize the instruction. Because if we don't have great instruction, then we're going to have disengagement. Or when Jonathan pops off and has really big behaviors, that actually causes a domino effect in our classroom. So we need to prioritize a behavior plan for Jonathan. Or this paraprofessional is seeing this happen out on the playground and it's causing our afternoons to be a really big problem. So by identifying with the entire team, the challenges and priorities, you can have a better rest of the week. So that's called the 5-minute meeting template. There's a lot more depth to that. So like I said, but there's that resource in the folder for you. I just talked about that. The other thing is for paraprofessionals specifically, particularly your one-on-one, when a student has a one-on-one paraprofessional and they're assigned to work with that child for 6 or 7 hours a day, even 4 hours a day, it can cause burnout and learned helplessness for both the para and the student. And so just because somebody has a one-on-one assigned to them doesn't mean that it has to be the same person throughout the day. And so really thinking about how can we make the schedule rotate. That way, if that person's ever out, it's not a huge meltdown for the kid because they have a whole team of people that know them and can support them. So this one takes a little bit of finessing, but I really believe in having teams for kids that people know how to support instead of one person and one kid for the entire year. And then last but not least, everything together. If you aren't willing to do it, then you shouldn't expect your paras to either. I see this a lot with a lot of the self-care kinds of things. And so, sure, the teacher, you may not be able to do all of the, and you may not be on the schedule for as much of the lifting or the transferring or the toileting or the, you know, feeding kinds of things. But you shouldn't expect your paraprofessional team to only be the ones to do it. So making sure that you're in the rotation for some of those less pleasant aspects of our job. So that is everything. Oh, thank you, Linda. I just saw your note. Start with the positive note of Mr. Thompson's good work. Yep, that's a great way to do it too. Absolutely. So that's everything I have for you all today. We discussed collaboration challenges that teachers and staff face. We learned some strategies, hopefully, and gave you some resources. I talked a little bit about why this work is important to me, and we got an opportunity to practice a strategy or two. If you need more information from me, you're more than welcome to email me at kzarat2@illinois.edu. You have the folder for you if you liked today's stuff. All of the resources that I talked about are in the folder for you. Oh, I sent that to Mickey on accident, and I meant to send that to everybody. That's twice now. Um, and then here are the references. Again, if you're a big reader, I really promote these two books, Better Conversations, and then Super Communicators is an awesome book. So thanks so much for spending your time with me today. I wish you all the best of luck. You're doing amazing work. Sometimes I know you may not feel it, but I see the work that you all are doing, and I appreciate everything you do. So I hope you have a really great night. Thanks for being here.